There is what is called the Guide for Applicants. The Guide for Applicants must not be mistaken with the guidelines. The guidelines is something like the legal basis. It's the Bible of the cooperation projects. But the Guide for Applicants, of which we've also printed a version and put on the table, unless someone has already stuffed that into their bag, the Guide for Applicants actually tells you step by step how the application, and in particular the Eform, works. Some of it is really basic. So it'll say, right, a drop-down menu is this. There's a little triangle in the right-hand side, and when you press the triangle, a menu appears. So it will explain some really basic things that, as I said, a lot of you digitally enabled will intuitively be able to maneuver. But this does not mean you should not read the Guide for Applicants. Now, there are a few funny things about the Eform, some of which are on here, but again, they will be mentioned in the Guide for Applicants as well. For example, do not change the file name of the Eform. Bad things happen when you change the file name of the Eform. I've not tried this myself.
Just don't do it.
Avoid it.
Really, really don't do it.
Avoid it. Okay. Section A of the Eform is all about the partners. There will be a section A for each partner. If you have 8 partners, there will be 8 sections of A, one for each partner. A lot of this will be automatically populated by you using the pick codes and the Eform pulling in a lot of information from the participant portal. So a lot of this will be there already. A lot of it will be unchangeable. So if there's a really terrible spelling mistake, it needs to be changed in the portal, and you will not be able to change that on the Eform. So make sure that everything you put in onto the portal is well spelled and clear. Check all of the details. Region, what region you're from. The regions usually correspond to UK sounding regions, but they are assigned as per the European Parliament regions. This is a little bit of history and a little bit boring. A2 is the main contact person, so probably the application coordinator, the person which will probably be you. And A3 will be the person responsible for the organization, so the CEO or the director of the applying organization. It may or may not be the same person, but in every organization you'll want to have one person who will be the named leader of the project and someone who will be the director of that organization. So again, this may be the same person, it may not. This is one of my favorite points. Be clear. I'll say this later, but I'll say it now already. The applications will be assessed by experts in the field. So if you tick it as a literature-based project, it will be assessed by specialists in literature. If it's a visual arts-based project, it will be assessed by specialists in visual arts. These are not people who work at the European Commission. They are experts like yourselves who have a very good understanding of literature, visual arts, the different art forms, for example, or cultural heritage. And if you are applying as a UK lead for the project, it will not be assessed by specialists from the UK. So the English you use needs to be a very Euro-understandable English. You need to be very clear in your language. Do not use British acronyms or even British-specific language. So spend a little bit of time going through your copy to make sure that you and the partners all understand what you are writing, and that it will be understandable by someone who is a non-native English speaker. So, section B, the structure of the partners. A lot of this, again, will be automatically populated. So if you are a local authority, it will say it will be a public organization. If you are a university, it will show up as a public organization. Anything else, you will show up as a private organization. Even if you are a charity, you will show up as a private organization, and then it'll show up, there will be another type of section where it shows up what type of organization you are. Again, these are European classifications of types of organizations. You might not immediately find yourselves in there. Aims and activities of the partners. This is where you'll say, right, our Cypriot organization does this, does that, and they're specialized in this. There's a little section in the Eform that you need to put this in. Ask your partners early for these things. It looks really simple, but if you're the lead partner and you're coordinating an application for 6 partners, you will need 6 short presentations from their comms department or from the relevant department or person in that organization. Start early with this. These are really silly reasons not to have your application full in time. For example, for not having a paragraph presenting your different partners. Again, what does the partner have for a role in the organization? And very importantly also, have they in the last 3 years received any EU funding, any type at all of EU funding? Your partners will need to research this probably. If they are good and involved in European projects, the likelihood is that they will receive EU funding as well in some kind of form. If they do, it is very important that they declare this, because there's a big no-no that is called double funding, and that means that you are not allowed to match fund EU funding with other EU funding. So your partners need to go through this exercise and make sure that they do or don't receive EU funding, and if they do, they need to declare that. And there's a section in the Eform for this. Description. So this is description of the project. Very basic things, the start and the end dates of the project. My recommendation would be try not to spend too much money or have too much of the activity happening before summer 2017. It would be a good thing for you to know that you are getting the funding before you start spending the money on the project. Some organizations might not want to do anything without a funding agreement, and that's fine, but there are some projects and partnerships who will want to run activities, even if it's just kickoff activities to start talking about what you're doing with the project earlier. You're allowed to do that, but you need to provide a little bit of a rationale for why you want that to happen. Let's say that your festival begins on the 16th of June, and you really want to build the festival into the project, but you understand that it might fall outside of the eligible period of the project, but you still really want to put that in. You understand that it'll be at your own risk, but it will have amazing benefit. So something like that you want to put in. C2 will be a description. Some of this will fill in automatically where it says this organization is this. Part of it will be staff numbers for you to say how many people are working in your partner organizations and how many of those will be involved in the project.
Can I just go back very briefly on end dates? Because if once you've been accepted and you've got your agreement, it's always worth trying to avoid having to renegotiate what and when you're going to do something. Really have a think about when you want your project to end. And think about whether you need to add a couple of months just to make sure that you've got everything done, so you don't have to go back and renegotiate what that end date will be.
Relevance to the program, objectives and priorities. This is where you tick off what objectives and priorities you are focusing on. Audience development, tick. Mobility, tick. So they will know what type of specialist to assign to you, but also what to look out for. So if you're going in as a mobility and audience development project, that you will be graded against evidence for audience development and mobility, for example. Again, don't go crazy with ticking all of the objectives and priorities, because you will be evaluated against them all. Fields. So if you are running as a visual arts based cooperation projects, interdisciplinary, cultural heritage. There's a long list. You may find that your exact art form might not be listed. You may also find that the project, because of its nature, is of interdisciplinary nature. So you can do that as well. And then you'll say, right, it is interdisciplinary, and the disciplines will be performing arts and cultural heritage. Participating countries, we went through this before. Which countries are participating in the project? Again, be sure you tick the relevant countries. And then we have C6. When you're emailing Steph and me and any of our Creative Europe desk colleagues, and we'll be asking you to send us your C6, this is what it is. This is the most important part of your application for us, but I also think of the project evaluators. This is your elevator pitch. This is where you will, in a very short, in a beautifully concise, in an expertly written way, present what your project will do, what it will achieve, and how much of a Creative Europe project it is. Again, this is your elevator pitch. You can send this to us for us to cast our eye over, to say, right, this is good, you may want to adjust the wording there. It's quite important, and you'll want to have a couple of people also outside of your project to read this, to make sure that they understand it as well. If there are more than 2 experts looking at this, and someone is going, okay, so which project is this? They will go to C6 and say, oh yes, this is the project that does that. Sounds amazing. So C6, very, very important. This should be in English. It can be in a different language as well, but it needs to be in one of the main European languages. 2,000 characters maximum, including spaces. Again, this is an elevator pitch for not very tall buildings, but really you need to be able to, for anyone, you need to be able to say what the project does and what it will achieve, even just for networking purposes. Always a good thing to have. Again, make sure that all partners can sign off on this. Make sure that all partners really own all of the project and that they see themselves in the C6, but indeed, of course, in all of the application as well. You'll probably have seen so far that the Eform is also an exercise in building your partnership. These questions that you'll be going through, and we'll get back to E in a bit, but the questions that you'll be going through will help you get to know your partners better, that they will allow your other partners to understand the other partners' motivations, reasons for existing, and this is all something that you need to be able to demonstrate as part of an application as well. So this is all part of the process. This isn't just to bore you or to create work for other people. This is all very valuable exercise. Summary of the budget. This is one of the things you'll do at the very end, probably because you'll be taking the main budget amounts and putting it in the Eform. So let's say some of this will go under direct costs, artistic costs, comms costs, and these main headings of the project budget will go into here as well. And the likelihood that you'll be reshuffling little bits of the budget form up until the last minute is high. So make sure you do not forget to do any of this. Did you contact your Creative Europe desk is one of the questions. C8. Of course, you will say yes. And when you say yes, a range of options will appear. Were they useful? Were they terrible? What kind of advice did they provide? Was this of technical nature? Was this of existential nature? Do fill that out, because then the European Commission can see how you've used that, whether that's been useful, and of course, whether we are useful as well. Okay, capacity. So this is really about how are you able to run this project in terms of capacity as organizations, as experts, but also how are you professionals? How good are you, and how well managed would this be? So that's what hides behind the question of operational and financial capacity. But financial capacity is quite an important one. The lead organization needs to have a certain turnover per year for them to be eligible to get most of the funding up front. If the lead partner is a fairly small organization with not much turnover per year, you may only get sections of the funding in installments. Again, for the reason that there is certain risk associated with transferring hundreds of thousands of euros before anything has started, which is typically how it works. Most of the funding is provided at the beginning of the project to the lead organizer, provided they have a healthy financial capacity. So not that you're going into administration or that you have bad debts or something like that. The international experience and own contribution. So again, the question here is, please describe how much of an experienced and professional European cultural operator you are. I've just paraphrased this. You may have noticed, but it is really important that you can show them how much of a professional outfit you are to be running this. If you're working with other partners than just the project partners, so we're talking about associate partners, for example, someone who might be sub-delivering on an element of the project, this is the moment to mention them and to say how and what they're contributing to the project. The work program, this might take a little bit of time. This will reflect from the earlier section the start and the end dates. So it'll say, right, you have up to 48 months to run this in, and in those 48 months, all this is going to happen. You have stages, phases, you may have the inception stage of the project, you may have certain things that run across, some things that go all the way through. Some people like to use Gantt charts. Everyone hands up who likes to use Gantt charts. Yeah, so this in a way is a tabled version of a Gantt chart, which might not be the best place to start, but in here you will say what is happening as part of the project, when they will take place, and the dates can be approximate. So I think you need to put in month and maybe even days of the month, but of course these things nobody's going to hold you to. You can change things around a little bit, but if you say, right, we will be running 4 festivals in 4 different countries, and you end up running only 2 festivals in one of the countries, then yes, then there will be eyebrows raised at the very latest when you report on the project. So in a way, this is part of the roadmap of the project as well. There isn't a whole lot of space in here, so again, use the detailed project description to show how the different activities, elements, moments, workshops, exhibitions, festivals, talks relate to the overall project and how the different parts articulate towards each other. And then, of course, who of your partners is responsible for it. So whether this is a joint thing or whether it's being led by the, say, Estonian partner, for example. What you will want to include is the kickoff meeting in Brussels. Now, the kickoff meeting in Brussels is incredibly useful. All the project leaders, so the organizations that are lead organizations for the applications, are summoned, or should I say invited to Brussels for 2 days, or maybe now it's 1 day, where you are explained what an eligible cost is and what an eligible cost is not. You have the opportunity to meet your project officer at the executive agency. You sometimes will have the opportunity to meet some of the people working in the policy section of the European Commission. And very importantly, this is a fantastic opportunity to network with other organizations who are, as you, leading on cooperation project. It's great. It's really, really useful, and it's the first part in how you can really establish a much more human connection with the people who are looking after the program at the executive agency, so your case officers, for example. and other organizations working on other types of projects. So it's really, really useful. They usually happen in the autumn, which isn't always useful when your project begins, say, on the 1st of June. So be aware of that. This is for a variety of purposes. This year, I think it's happening on the 7th of October, 10th of October, something like that. So all of the projects that last year put in an application successfully are going to be in Brussels for a day or two this October, and will be sort of taken through the motions by colleagues at the executive agency for that day. It's really, really useful. Of course, your projects may want to have their own kickoff meetings that may even be a little bit earlier along in the project. So that is another thing you may want to build in. You may or may not wish to call it a kickoff meeting as well.
We found it tremendously useful to have that meeting 4 weeks before we started our project, because it enabled our lead partner to come very, very fresh from that day and inculcate into all our other partners exactly what had to be done to make sure there were no tears before bedtime 2 years later. Given that we haven't quite got to 2 years later, you can come back to me on that and ask me whether that's actually true or just the theory. But that was a huge plus. The other huge plus was the networking that you do, because a lot of you will be obliged to have dissemination strategies as to how you're going to extend the impact and reach of your work. And so you'll be wanting to meet all those European networks. Well, if they haven't got European projects running, most of them are based in Brussels anyway. So it's very handy for those two reasons.
One of the things you need to also show that you're really good at is how good you are at running the project. So looking at issues of governance, of project management. Will you have your artistic advisory board that meets 4 times during the project cycle? Will you have all of the partners gathering around the table every so and so many months to say, right, our project is going on track, or it's not going on track, and that means we need to do this, that, and that. Catch-up meetings, partner meetings, if you time them correctly with, for example, the opening of an exhibition or something, so that you can cut down on travel costs, bunch of ideas there, but involve these kinds of elements as well. I'm not sure this is in here, but it should be evaluation as well. You will want to build evaluation into your project as an activity. It is not demanded, it is not required, but it may be a little bit odd if it was missing. And I think in the UK we have a fairly robust culture of evaluation, and I think this is kind of a thing that would be very beneficial for a European partnership that constitutes of different organizations and countries that might not have the reporting culture that we have here in the UK. Your partners might not like you for it if you suggest a very robust or external evaluation, but maybe they will. Again, if some of the activities are involving your non-full project partners, this needs to go in there as well. So if you have, for example, a mini showcase in Switzerland, which is non-eligible, not part of the partnership and anything. If you have a mini showcase in Switzerland, it's a terrible example. Let's say if you had a trade mission going to APAP or another big event outside of Europe where the glory of your project can be shared, put that into the project as well, and it would have to be included in there, showing what kind of an international outreach and dimension your project has. So even though it doesn't flow or might not flow perfectly into the other project activities, mention it. Statistics. This is a tricky one. You need to... There's a backstory, and that is that in the previous program, there wasn't a whole lot of reporting done in terms of what granted projects, funded projects achieved, and so getting statistics on what projects did and were doing was incredibly tricky. So this is why at application stage, these questions are already being built in. So, for example, how many people do you think will benefit from this project? How many professionals will be involved? What types of professionals? Is this for students in a certain area? Are these for curators? So you need to be fairly circumspect about how much your project can achieve, how many people it can involve in an immediate sense, and then also in a wider sense. So go back to your comms plan, for example, your sharing events, and see what, in terms of statistics, you can put forward here. Just because you are putting a project website up and your typical website has 5 million visitors because you're a world-class heritage institution, doesn't automatically mean that your project website will also get 5 million hits. So again, with these kinds of things, do be careful, and also bring in your project partners for this. This is impossible to respond to just as the project leader.
Can I ask a question? Because I still find this puzzling in terms of trying to work out what constitutes success. Do you think the way to think about it is to try to get the balance between substantiating what you're going to do across the partnership in terms of numbers on the one hand, and not wildly overclaiming on the other? That actually what you're being asked for is some kind of benchmark which you can then assess when you come to report against it in terms of actuals having delivered the project?
Yes to all of the above. I think you need to be able to make a good case for how you understand something. Just as I was mentioning before, if you say, right, our project, we're looking at audience development, but our idea of audience development is not this, it's actually that. You are building for yourself a area and a way in which the evaluators and the project partners understand what certain something means. And if you say, right, well, for us, success is this. We measure things in this kind of a way in, say, England and that kind of a way, and that's the framework we'll be using across the partnership, then that's something you need to lay out and explain for them to then be able to understand later on. But if there is anything vague here in the guidelines in your project, I would see that as an opportunity for you to go in there and lay down the rules and explain how you're going to do this. This goes back to what I mentioned about methodology. If you've not made it explicit, if you're just leaving it to vague understanding, then you're creating a little bit of a difficulty. Make it explicit. Make it incredibly explicit. Say for us, it's bullet points 2 and 3 under subheading 5 that we are focusing on, and that means, for the sake of our project and our partnership, this. And that's what our project is going to be responding to.